Hello everybody and welcome to your show Political Landscape of this week, the 10th of June 2023. This week, Professor Chossudovsky will talk about the blame that we are trying to force over Russia, and he will talk about what is going on with Nord Stream linked to Ukraine. Hello, Professor. Bonjour.
Yes, good afternoon. Delighted to be back on Lux Media. I think this week we are witnessing a major environmental catastrophe and humanitarian catastrophe in Ukraine, which is the sabotage of the dam, the Kakhovskaya Dam. And it's also the catastrophe affecting one of the largest hydroelectric complexes in Europe. Immediately, what has happened is that the media has blamed Russia. Now, I have looked into this matter over several months, but first of all, the dam, as well as the hydroelectric complex, were in Russian territory. In other words, in territory which was under their jurisdiction or their control. And the question I would ask myself: how on earth would the Russians intend to actually blow up an infrastructure which is in a territory which is under their control? It doesn't make sense. And our message to mainstream journalists, it's elementary logic. Use your common sense. Why would they do that? And it's like a Russian roulette harakiri, so to speak. But now, the issue of this disaster is something which we have to address, because back in October, in fact, it was October 21st, the Russian authorities, via their representative to the United Nations, sent a formal letter to Antonio Guterres, in other words, United Nations United Nations Secretary General, of course, and it was CC'd to every single member of the United Nations Security Council. And it pertained to the fact that there was a plan by the Zelensky government to actually implement an act of sabotage. And they pointed to the fact that this would be very devastating. It would flood territories inside Ukraine and Russia. And they asked the United Nations Secretary General to investigate the matter. And what did he do? Nothing. He didn't. I mean, he didn't even. He didn't raise the issue at the United Nations Security Council. It was sent to all members and also to the president of the council, and then it was simply ignored. And then you might ask why on earth does the UN not address these issues, which normally would require an investigation, because this infrastructure is so fundamental for both Ukraine and for Russia, and it is now resulting in the loss of lives, floods extending in different parts of the Dnieper Valley, and there's another element which was mentioned by the Russians, and I mean we simply have to acknowledge it. How is it that on the 5th and 6th of June, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, from the United Kingdom of Great Britain, was in Kiev. It was an unannounced visit. It wasn't an official visit. Unannounced visit to Kiev, and he arrives on the 5th, and he was present on the day when it happened. Now, there is a need for an investigation. Obviously, the AFU, the Armed Forces of Ukraine, are they behind it? The Russians say that they have evidence that they're behind it, but the media, first of all, the UN has ignored this totally, and the media has said, "Oh no, the Russians did it." Now, I'd like to point out that this is an absurd proposition, because the Russians would not, under any circumstances, blow up infrastructure in an area which they control, and there are people there, and there are Russians there as well as Ukrainians, etc., etc. But that is absurd to say that Russia is going to blow up something which is within its territory. But this is not the first time that this has happened. Of the media, and I say media disinformation and censorship is fundamental in addressing the crisis in Ukraine. Because remember, last year, 2022, shortly before the Russian invasion, which was on the 24th of February, there was a press conference with Biden and the Chancellor, the German Chancellor Stolz. And at that press conference, Biden said very textually that if Russia invades Ukraine, we will blow up Nord Stream. And he said, we will do it. Now, all that is on record. The statements of Biden, the statements of Chancellor Scholz, etc. And then we had the report of Seymour Hersh. The sabotage was on the 27th of September. I wrote an article on the 11th of October pertaining to this sabotage, and said there's nothing secret about that, because President Biden announced it. Now, Seymour Hersh subsequently confirmed that it was a US-sponsored team that went in and blew up the Nord Stream pipeline, and which, of course, created tremendous embarrassment because the official position in Germany, is that, well, we have no evidence, but it could be the Russians that blew it up. Okay, so they said the Russians might have done it. Again, it's an absurd proposition, but why would the Russians blow up an infrastructure which allows them to export oil and gas to the European Union? And now we've got something more recently which has appeared, again, another piece of misinformation on the part of the Western media, because they're saying, oh, it could be Ukraine that is actually behind this, and that it might be the Ukrainians that did it. Now, this borders on ridicule, because if I may say so, because if you look at the map, which is now on the screen, you will see that if the Ukrainian Navy had been responsible for doing this sabotage, they would have had to they would have had to travel 10,000 miles from the Black Sea all the way through the Mediterranean and up through the Atlantic, going through the Straits of Gibraltar, up, and then going on to the Baltic Sea. It's 15,000 kilometers, or about 10,000 miles, for the Ukrainian Navy to go there to implement an act of sabotage. And obviously, this statement by U.S. intelligence, which was quoted by the Washington Post, is absolute nonsense. It's rubbish. Saying, oh, yes, perhaps the Ukrainians did it. And that's simply to whitewash the fact that President Biden had ordered that action, which took place on the 27th of September of last year, and which has been conducive to massive crisis, energy crisis in the European Union. And in effect, and we covered that in a previous program, that was an act of war. It wasn't an act of war against Russia. It was an act of war against the European Union. And it had been ordered by Biden with the complicity of the German Chancellor, which is the head of government of Germany. So it's an act of treason at the same time. Now, here we go, flashback to what's happened in Ukraine in the last couple of days. To say that Russia is responsible for bombing its own infrastructure it borders on absurd. These media reports intimating that Russia is behind this action simply don't have any empirical basis, and they don't take into account the fact that this was raised, this was sent to the Security Council of the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council, and the Secretary General of the United Nations, who has simply remained totally silent and says the Russians did it. He says the Russians did it, and the evidence is scanty to that effect, because you don't actually in acts of war you don't attack yourself from within. Okay, you don't simply go in and blow up your infrastructure. No, you don't do that. And now the likelihood is that this was ordered by the regime in Kiev, and it was supported and endorsed by US NATO. I can't, again, we have to enter into area of let's say of investigation as to who was behind this, but it's certainly not the Russians that did it.
Ask you something regarding United Nations. Are they sold somewhere because they didn't react to it to protect alternation?
Well, yeah, that's a very important point. But the thing is that the United Nations has been hijacked by the United States. And that's been a gradual process, but the US has dominated the UN, and it's located in New York. The headquarters are in New York. But I should say that the Secretary General of the United Nations, somebody who's totally corrupt. It's totally corrupt. And if he had been an honest official of the UN, he would have said he would have received this notice through the normal channels from the Russian representative to the United Nations, and he would have read it and said, we have to investigate this because to protect this dam is absolutely fundamental. And whoever attacked that dam and the hydroelectric complex, it's an act of war. But it would appear that it might be an act of war within that regime. that Kiev regime, which is supported by the Western military alliance, US, NATO. But what is very serious as well is that here we have a government in Ukraine which visibly is Nazi. Nobody can deny that. Nobody, because they have the Nazi symbols. They worship Adolf Hitler. They worship Stepan Bandera, and there we are, where a government which is neo-Nazi, with a heritage going back to World War II, which glorifies Nazism, and then we blame the Russians for being Nazis. Okay, now we may dislike the Russians, but we can't deny the fact that the Soviet Union was the victim of an invasion, which was Operation Barbarossa, and which led to 26 by Nazi Germany, and which led to 26 million casualties, deaths in World War II, which at the time was more than 10% of their population. I haven't made the calculus, but we're talking about massive casualties during World War II, and then we say, oh no, Putin is a Nazi and Zelensky is a Democrat. I can tell you, Zelensky, and that people should know it, Zelensky is of Russian Jewish descent. Many members of his family were victims of the Holocaust, and he is Jewish and he's Russian. His maternal tongue is Russian, and until he entered politics, or before politics, he was certainly not fluent in Ukrainian. He was speaking Russian, and now he's involved in Nazi government, which is not only going against the Russian minorities within Ukraine, but which is upholding Nazism. Now, that's treacherous from the point of view of a president who is of Jewish descent, that he would actually go against his family history and side with this regime, this neo-Nazi regime. Now, I should say the Ministry of the Interior, the Ministry of Defense, they are embedded into the Nazi ideology. And unfortunately, Western governments are supporting that, despite the fact it's known and documented that this is a Nazi government in Kiev. And we can't even call it a government. So there we are. We can blame the Russians for many things. I don't want to take sides. What is important is that truth prevail with regard to the coverage of this war, and that we're not victims of lies and fabrications by the Western media.
So now, what do you think that the future of the world is holding, when you see that the major international institutions are very in bad posture?
Well, first of all, we're at a very dangerous crossroads in our history. I've been studying the issue of nuclear war and nuclear weapons and ideology and so on. I started that more than 10 years ago, and we are at a very dangerous crossroads. Specifically because the U.S., the U.S. in particular, they believe that they can win a nuclear war, and they are prepared to use nuclear weapons. And what do we have? We have a $1.3 trillion nuclear weapons program, strictly for nuclear weapons. Okay. In the post-Cold War era. And it boggles the mind that we should that the United States, which should spend so much money solely on nuclear weapons, if they didn't have the intent to use them. And they do have the intent to use them. And if they do that, we are in the unspeakable. As I think that in this particular case, it's the future of humanity which is at stake. A nuclear war, a third world war using nuclear weapons will not lead to any outcome but a situation of total annihilation of humanity as we know it. We should be very cautious and take a position against the use of nuclear weapons by both sides. But I have to say that in this case, it's the United States which has taken the lead right from the beginning in 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, under the so-called Manhattan Project. And what a lot of people don't know is that there was a secret plan dated 1945, September 15, 1945, which of course has been declassified and people can consult it. It was a secret plan to bomb 66 urban areas of the Soviet Union with more than 200 atomic bombs. And that is what led to the arms race. That's otherwise, if it hadn't been for that plan threatening the Soviet Union at the time, the Russians or the Chinese would not have developed their nuclear weapons capabilities. We have to look at history, and I think we are at very dangerous crossroads in our history. We have to pressure our governments to enter into peace negotiations, to re-establish diplomatic discourse and debate with internationally and certainly with the Russian Federation, and we must, and our message to the media is stop lying to us. When the lie becomes the truth, there's no moving backwards. And that is what is unfolding, not only with regard to the coverage of the war in Ukraine, but to the economic crisis, to the corona crisis, and to the process of impoverishment of large sectors of the world population. We have to, well, I would say I've worked for many years in my life with the mainstream media, including Radio-Canada and CBC, Le Monde Diplomatique. But they have changed course. There are honest journalists, many honest journalists are being enticed into lying and conforming. And what we have now is a process of censorship. It's a derogation of the rights of freedom of expression, specifically by the independent media. And that is absolutely essential, that we must restore truth in media at all levels, and that we must address the dangers of this crisis, this all-encompassing crisis, which by any standard is the most serious crisis in the history of humanity.
Yes, I think that you're right on what you have presented today, and all this is placing us in an uncertain environment, and it's really not easy for all the people of the planet and the country. I would like to thank you. I would like to invite people to go on your website and participate financially to your work.
Well, our website in English is globalresearch.ca. It is not picked up by the search engines, but I suggest you visit We have extensive coverage on a daily basis with, on average, 20 articles a day. We cover the geopolitics of the war. We cover issues pertaining to poverty, unemployment, the economic crisis. And of course, we've also focusing on the public health crisis underlying the mRNA vaccine and the so-called corona crisis. And we also point to the fact that their relationship, these are not separate crises. They're part of a multiplicity of occurrences and developments over history and more recently, which have to be understood. And we try to present a perspective which is diverse in terms of opinion. Sometimes, I mean, as editor, I don't always agree with what my contributors write, but that is the basis of dialogue and discussion. We have different views from different people, independent media, as well as journalists and scholars and scientists, and we invite you to take cognizance of what we publish. We also publish in French at mondialisation.ca, and we also have a website which is based in Mexico City, which publishes in Spanish, and that is the website is globalizacion.ca. And we also receive occasional publications in other languages, including German and occasionally Chinese and of course Italian and Portuguese. So that is the background, and we are fully funded by our readers. We don't receive any kind of support from any kind of foundation, and we invite you to become members, and if you wish, make a modest contribution to global research. But our main objective also is that the articles of our site we should spread the word, because it's not the search engines which are going to spread the word, because they're involved in acts of censorship against us. The same thing is true of Twitter. So there we are. My greetings to everybody, and hopefully we will wage a campaign all over the world for peace and social justice.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody who are watching the show and who are participating and sharing around in your area and in your family. Thank you very much.